I want to thank Wilf and UNA and SOAS for bringing this amazingly rich and diverse just day of connections together. But it is the end of quite a long, quite tiring day. And I'm the last speaker, and I have to say, I kind of feel that almost everything analytical and many of the illustrations that inform why we have formed XR Peace, which has only been going 6 months, by the way. But as you can tell, you know, we have actually been involved in these issues for a lot longer than that. But that's all been said by other speakers, you know, from so many, you know, they've made the case for XR Peace and for the intersectionality of our issues so much more eloquently and with so much more knowledge and up-to-date information than I'm able to give, and rightly so, from many voices and with many perspectives. So because it's the end of a long day, I'm actually, and also because I spent part of this week with a very bad cold and not really able to focus on this, I'm going to run through this presentation, but I want you, I decided to give it, rather than just ditching it, I nearly decided just to ditch it and just speak, but because I actually put together some photos, and photos work at a different level in people's consciousness, I think, in both their minds and their bodies. And so I'm going to go through it because I want more than the words, although obviously Wilf can have this presentation and put it on the website and you can read some of the analytical points or some of the historical points. But I think it's a way to engage also when we've got very tired minds and we've been listening to an awful lot of amazing, but, you know, very complex analyses. But we know the two greatest extinction threats are nuclear weapons and the climate emergency. And that really was the starting point for XR Peace. Now, in case there's anyone in this room that doesn't know about Extinction Rebellion, but actually it shouldn't be surprising if there isn't, because Extinction Rebellion has only been around for, well, it launched about a year ago. Of course, there have been people thinking about doing something of this kind on the climate emergency, but it also was launched here in this country. And so that means that, you know, when we look at my PowerPoint, what we're seeing yet again is a kind of dominant voice from, if you like, the you know, basically the rich North colonialist perpetrators, if you like, certainly since the 16th century, of the military industrial activities that have led to this climate emergency. And in part, maybe that's a good thing. But one of the things that I think is very important is that we do not forget that, yes, this military industrial North and West did so much, you know, to cause this ecocidal climate emergency. And living here, and especially born in the northern and western part of the world, which I have, this has massively benefited us. And it's also given us both privileges and ways of working, and as we heard in that dialogue between Margot and Gwyn, also ways of being taken seriously, that it has not, you know, been accorded by the very perpetrators to the people who are the people and the countries, the nations, the indigenous people, across the board, who already, and for quite a long time, have been suffering most from this perpetration. Military, industrial, patriarchal perpetration. And so we as privileged activists, we have to acknowledge that in everything we say and do. Moreover, we also have to recognize, and I was so glad that a number of the talks have been doing that precisely, and increasingly around the world and in the UN, it is being recognized, the extent to which indigenous peoples, global south, women and youth have actually they've provided most of the leadership, most of the ideas, most of the new thinking around security, and also done most of the heavy lifting on the climate issue, and for far, far longer than they are given credit for. And I think that's really crucial. So, you know, yes, these are the key points of Extinction Rebellion, which has declared this emergency action to halt and reverse climate catastrophe. And within this last year, that has spread to a lot of countries, but it is still a way of doing that work that is still dominated by the practices, the thinking, the tools used by primarily Northern and Western countries. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it, because we're actually needing to change the policies of our countries back here, because that's what, you know, the continuation of those policies is what is causing so much climate devastation. So with that understanding, I think it is still necessary to actually talk about why we developed XR Peace. And we've drawn from the non-violent campaigns on global dangers and humanitarian needs. WILPF, we know, over 100 years of doing this work. Greenham, you know, the 1980s. But also the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which we deliberately actually developed out of, we brought into the nuclear issue more internationally and the peace movement more internationally, the feminist humanitarian understandings in our campaigning for disarmament, peace and security. And again, pictures, they say something. That one at the top was a WILPF organizer. Well, WILPF was one of the key organisers in the pouring rain of a ban the bomb demonstration the day before the resumption of the UN General Assembly negotiations that led to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the 2017 treaty that others have talked about. And we also see these connections of, you know, banners on you know, Faslane fences, and also down at Aldermaston. And I've had to mobilise some of my own photographs because I didn't have time to go. And we know this, and this has, you know, we made into banners, and I have got photographs of that, but I just didn't have a chance to put them together in this. Most of the photographs are actually from the April Rebellion, and that's before we decided that we needed to have a platform within XR that was specifically raising the issues of the military contributions to climate destruction. And so we brought out, now of course I've left my, well, I was going to wave around a leaflet, but I decided to leave the stuff there. That was the XR Peace leaflet that we used for the 2 weeks of the October Rebellion. And a number of these points are taken directly from the arguments put in that leaflet. But the photograph comes from the April Rebellion. And I'm using these because they're showing, they tell a story through the slogans and the messages chosen by XR, and then also chosen by XR Peace. And so they're not meant to be complete, they're not analytical as such, but they are about how we put those arguments together. So it's talking about all these issues that we've actually been hearing about from all these other speakers, so I won't go into detail. And I realised that in the little description in this, I'd actually referred to militarism and war as the armed pillars of patriarchy. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I'd forgotten I'd said that. Because I was used to previously talking about them as the armed wings. They give kind of flight to patriarchy, but we don't actually want patriarchy to fly. And frankly, patriarchy isn't flying. Patriarchy is dug, it's stuck. It's deeply stuck. The military-industrial patriarchal complex is deeply stuck. it's dangerously stuck in all of our lives. And militarism and war are the means by which it is upheld and used in colonialism, in wars, in trying to save capitalism. And of course, militarized economies, as we heard in the very first speech, I think, that Margareta made, are huge carbon emitters, and we've done some research of that in the Green Party. And they pose the most serious threats to all of our nations and all of our people. So, again, this is very familiar, I won't spend much time on it, is this global heating exacerbates the situations that have actually been already part of patriarchy and warmongering and militarism. And these are some of the implications. And again, we have to recognize how these are connected, because they are connected. And starvation is going to get worse and worse. There are, whole regions, often in places that already have food insecurity, where climate destruction is going to make that so much worse. And then, of course, the use of nuclear weapons. I mean, if any of you saw the film The Age of Stupid by Franny Armstrong back in, I think it was 2009, the last archivist left alive on the earth, he goes through all these interviews, and it is a he, goes through, although played by this wonderful actor, Pete Postlethwaite, he goes through all these interviews, again, primarily with men, although not entirely, about the policies and why it is so important to have a military industrial and all these sorts of things. But his comment, and it's almost a throwaway comment, is, why didn't we wake up? And by the way, I think this was the year 2040, so he's actually saying how soon this happened. Why didn't we wake up? And then he said, well, of course, as things got tougher and tougher, nuclear weapons got used. And it was the nuclear weapons that actually finished the human race off and most of the other species. So let's recognize that nuclear weapons are the mass destructive product of patriarchal violence, militarism, materialism, and extractivism. And some of us in the room, in different kinds of ways, have worked all our lives against every part or different parts of those things. And when I say extractivism, it's the kind of it's a word that is developed out of the climate justice movement to specifically look at those arguments that has been raised here about not just the extraction of uranium causes nuclear weapons, the extraction of coal increases toxic pollution and climate destruction, but also the extraction of a whole lot of minerals that are being used for greener, to try to combat the fossil fuel parts of the problem are themselves extracted from countries in a way that is utterly dehumanizing and utterly contemptuous of the people who live there, the ways in which those people have kept that in the ground because they understood, as we know the Aboriginal people of what is now called Australia, understood you mustn't take the rainbow serpent of uranium out of the ground, and is still carrying on with the cobalt and the other minerals. And it's not just blood diamonds, it is about green alternatives to coal that are part of the extractivist way of trying to tackle climate change by doing more of what they've been doing, but just in different parts of the world, or more in the same parts of the world, but for different reasons. But there are ways in which we can engage, and treaties are not the answer by themselves, but treaties can help to shift the normative and therefore the political acceptability of certain kinds of weapons, of certain kinds of actions, and that's why a law on ecocide could be very, very important, would be very, very important, and that is why we recognised after we'd, banned, the cruise, the Pershing, and, the intermediate range weapons from Europe, we had to ban the nuclear testing, because while at Greenham, we had a bunch of people from the countries where nuclear testing had destroyed their environments, destroyed their reproduction, destroyed their lives in so many ways. And they came to us and said, yeah, well, once you've got rid of that US base out of your country and you've got rid of those weapons, actually, before you get rid of all of that, take this on too. And they particularly were saying ban nuclear testing, and that's what I chose to do as soon as we got that basic INF treaty, which of course Trump and Putin now have trashed. But it did a job, an important job at that time. So let's recognise sometimes you have to win something that is incremental, but we have to go on and recognise the next challenges. And the next challenge was clearly, after banning nuclear testing in a treaty that has not entered into force because of rivalry only among the nuclear armed states, we set out to ban nuclear weapons through a different process that would put leadership and agency into the hands of the non-nuclear countries. Now, how did we do this? Well, I'm raising this from Nunu because I've actually taken some of the slides that she gave, that she had put into her presentation in October at a panel that I was on, that was about the intersectionality. And she's both WILPF, she's ICAN, and she's a whole lot more than that. And this really epitomized what became so different about ICAN. And we had to consciously make it different from how the international peace movement certainly had been. Now, when a lot of people think about ICAN, they nowadays, rather sadly, I think about the Nobel Peace Prize, that was awarded to ICAN in 2017, and, about people, very often, leadership that is not thinking about these issues, who somehow became very associated with that. But let's recognise, when the Nobel Committee awarded that, it was awarding it to a collectivity. And the collectivity, and you can see that on that, in fact, Nunu and I are to the side, standing next to each other, but that collectivity, there was a steering group, but essentially, we learned from the people who had actually had landmines and cluster munitions on their doorstep and had mobilized to get those treaties, and they were the ones that knew throughout Africa, throughout Asia, throughout Latin America, actually how to get the governments to take the steps. And now it's those governments that are absolutely at the forefront of the signatures and the ratifications that mean that we've now got 80 signatures and 33 ratifications. We're over 2/3 of the way towards entry into force. But it is those people. And yet, when people think of ICAN now, they are not recognizing how much work was being done by activists from Africa, Asia, Latin America at the forefront. Asia Pacific, and Setsuko has been mentioned already, was a key part of that, and I think that was very important. And also to recognise that in the Middle East, where the UN's just finished a conference, even in Israel, there were activists prepared to go out onto the streets in that very difficult militarised environment and call for action, not just for banning nuclear weapons and getting rid of the Israeli nuclear weapons from that region, but also for recognising, sorry, that's actually a larger version of that, for recognising at that particular time, 2012, the importance of negotiations and not bombing at that point. So XR Peace, there's that slogan in XR of beyond politics. Actually, beyond politics, takes many forms, and this again is just a few pictures of how it does. And Million Women rises there because of the violence against women is so much a part of it, and also I just wanted to apologise that as soon as I finish speaking almost, I'm going to need to get down to Hanover Square, because Reclaim the Night march is going to be gathering there from 6 o'clock, and I hope some of you will be able to join it. But these are just some of the ideas I'm taking on the military-industrial complex, and after bumping into Alice, I just had to, that's Alice through the fence. I often put the that caption on it. But the fact is that Beyond Politics has been mobilised even in this country for quite a long time, and those are just, again, some pictures to just give you a sense. Even the Dying in the City, to raise awareness of the military-industrial, the banking connections, and how we stopped the nuclear weapon convoy. Sorry?
Gwyn on the street.
Is that Gwyn on the street?
Yeah.
Goodness.
I head on the curve. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Nothing new. And I've used these XR messages, the wake up. Well, that's what we've been talking about. The climate action now. And I've got some text that just says, what do we mean by that? That's because I've taken those texts from some of the talks that I do that are actually trying to explain to people who don't think about how these connect up. And, you know, to explain, actually they've always connected up. There's nothing new about the connections up. We've got to just get a lot better at connecting up ourselves to address them all. And that doesn't mean running thin. It means addressing them all through solidarity with each other who's addressing different parts of it. That's absolutely crucial. And that's how I think we need to live, and how we want to live. I was going to have something about violence, having spent a bit of time recently in Hong Kong and just seen how that, and also traditional politics has its place, and here's, you know, Caroline Lucas. She wasn't actually invited to sit behind that, and she and I got in trouble for the fact that she did, and I took a photo. But but that's because the UK, amongst other nuclear armed states, boycotted the treaty negotiations. But getting stuff into different political party agendas, we finally got something in on decarbonising the military into the Green Party policy just in October. Again, these are very obvious, the relationship with education and denying girls education while spending huge sums of money on the nuclear and various other military things. I don't need to add this to this group, but you know, this I just wanted partly because this is Cynthia Coburn, who died in September, which is part of so many of our lives and SOAS lives, and you know, here and there on a Women in Black vigil, but also because I really wanted, and I'm sorry that the other picture was of me, but I wanted the thing to be able to be read, and I was using this to show how we connect up with, you know, current, like, arms sales, but also who are they being used against, why we have to be responsible for stopping those arms sales, and that's why it all has to be feminist. And again, you know, I'm not going to leave you to read that now, but you can see the whole presentation. This is the only actual picture, because I was a legal observer for the entire 2 weeks of the XR rebellion in October, so I wasn't supposed to be snapping pictures. But this picture was taken by somebody from CND, and I think it's on the steps of the Ministry of Defence, and these are the connections that XR Peace makes. We know non-violent people power works, because on that, one of these earlier pictures, I showed Green and Women dancing on top of a nuclear weapons silos, New Year's Day of 1983. And this picture shows that the silos completely empty. Actually, it was used for Star Wars recently, for the rebel camp, which is what you would expect. But, you know, the common land restored, at least to some extent. And the final slide is what XR wants is this notion of regenerative culture. And regenerative culture, in their terms, are these key points. But of course, they haven't invented these points, have they? They've been part of these movements. So I'm just going to leave us, leave my bit, just with some questions about the necessity, really, to recognise more clearly youth, the young people, and not just Greta Thunberg, actually the young people coming out on strike in so many cities, the young people getting involved. When you saw most of my pictures, which were taken in April, it was a whole lot of young people blocking Oxford Circus. This picture shows blocking Waterloo Bridge. And you can tell it's Waterloo Bridge because there's a South Bank behind. But, you know, blocking Piccadilly Circus, blocking all these intersections where cars have, and industries and the military have reigned supreme for so long. And yet XRP's picture is a much smaller subset. And it's made me think why that is and what needs to change in what we're doing to change that, not in what they're doing. And I'll finish there.
As there is a bit of a space, I don't want to ask a question actually, I just want to say thank you to you all today. As a member of the dominant gender, who have essentially condescended to, oppressed, subjugated, where we haven't actually enslaved all the other gender identities from millennia. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come here to listen, to learn, and hopefully develop understanding. Thank you very much.
Yes, so what you said about the young people was very interesting, and obviously I'm a young person, and I think particularly in my generation, I'm 22, there is a lot of awareness about the environment in particular, not necessarily about the intersections, or everything we've been talking about today, because a lot of this was revelatory to me and I've learned a lot. However, I wanted to raise the issue of particularly school-age children who are participating in activism, particularly in climate activism, and I personally think that is a shame that school-age children feel the need to come out of school and to miss out on their vital education in their developing years, when we as sort of older people, as adults, should be taking up the mantle. Children shouldn't be worrying about this, and that's just my particular opinion. So, yeah.
Actually, children are worrying about this, and we found this out also. I grew up as a part of the generation that had nuclear war nightmares, and because I partly spent some time in the States, the duck and cover exercise, I actually thought they were huge fun, because I didn't understand. The kids now, and most recently, the school, I live now in Brighton and Hove, and the children came, that did the school strike in September. They specifically asked for support from the adults to the climate strike. Until they did that, I was very respectful of the space that they were creating. But on that occasion, I went out, and it was the most extraordinary thing. And, children were not missing their education for those few hours. I talked with some of the kids, and they said, no, we came down with our teachers. The school, in their particular schools, and I don't say that that's all schools, but this was Brighton and Hove. But and then I talked to one of the teachers with that group. But the schoolgirl, who was probably about 13, 14, it was a great day out. It was a Friday. Secondly, she said the school had said that the children who wanted to go on this could, and the teachers who wanted to go on it could, and that they wanted that the two of them, the teachers and the kids, would actually go from the school. And the children that didn't want to go, and the teachers that didn't want to go, didn't need to go, they would stay and do other kinds of lessons. But then, the teacher particularly talked to me about this, but the schoolgirl had said, but we learned so much in the run-up to this because it was mobilised into all of our other lessons, the geography, the history, the science, all of this was brought in. And then they were going to finish and not just have an early day off on a Friday because the demonstration finished time about 2ish, I think. They were going back to school, and they were then going to write letters to their MPs, councillors, or anyone else they chose. And that was part of the education process. And I bet that not only did none of them not remember everything that involved, but a lot of the kids that didn't come out on the strike also learned a hell of a lot through that. So I think we have to recognise this is their future, and it is an emergency. What we have to do is actually support what they need from us, so that they carry on being able to have education and stop climate destruction.
You mentioned supporting the young activists who are taking to the street. What are the conversations that XRPs in particular are having around how to support young people and building a leaderful movement that is not ageist? And I forgot it. Yes, that. Yeah.
Can we also have, because I know you wanted to say something. I wasn't at school, but I actually was here at SOAS at university doing a master's when I started living at Greenham Common and got arrested and then sent off to prison. And I know how scary that is. But I'm so happy to hear you say that you were encouraging your kids, because the kids are part of this leadership and need to be.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about...
Hold it really close, because I've not got good hearing.
I was just going to talk about the similar thing that she just mentioned about children going out in the field to learn, have this hands-on approach, because they not only they go out to learn or share with their peers at school, and also it's part of interactive learning, but they come home and teach their parents on everything.
Yes.
You know, my son is like that. He comes home and he teaches me about the different animals and insects. Now I know every part of my body as well. He teaches me about anatomy and all of those things. When I went to study as a lecturer in the lifelong learning sector, and the sad thing was that I'm not allowed to teach from primary school to secondary school, from 18 to tertiary education. That's where my qualification is around. But the thing that he teaches me and what I share with people, they think that I spend all my days learning about something. But I have a teacher at school, at home, who goes to school and learn from the field work, important field work. It's part of the research and everything. I know the name of everything. That's why it's important for children to get involved, to be out there, and also just to just confirm that it's very useful for kids to be more out there, to know what's going on around the world and in everything that that is around us. It's part of understanding the world around us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another really great contribution into the conversation. So your question was about what are the conversations within XRPs, and to be honest, I don't think there has been XRPs just happened sort of rather suddenly focused on trying to get some direct action at places like the Ministry of Defence and also British Aerospace, and connecting up also with the arms fair that was taking place in London earlier in September and making those kinds of connections. But XR is having that conversation. And the other thing about XR that I think is really important, there is a kind of, a group that developed a lot of these ideas, but a lot of the real thinking and working on it and talking about it is happening in all the towns, all the villages, all the local areas, and that's bringing whole new sets of people in, many of whom have not been direct actionists themselves. There's a whole lot of training going on about non-violent action, and in those, a lot of them are parents and a lot of them are students, and some of them going along to those meetings are the kids themselves, and all of that is actually on a local basis being talked about. I haven't seen it turned into written analyses because often the activists develop a lot of the, like a lot of the stuff I have up there about, you know, feminist non-violence, we developed at Greenham, but we were so busy doing it that we didn't put it into the forms that got published at that time. And, you know, and we need to add the activism and the analysis together. So there is the recognition that kids are being arrested, kids, you know, younger than 18, and what, you know, what are the implications for them. But the kids, actually, their answers to us is, we've got to be arrested to confront them, you know, the establishment that's doing the damage, that this is our future and we won't have a future. So you can't threaten us by telling us that being arrested will ruin our chances of, you know, jobs in the future. Now, I did that. I got arrested and it didn't ruin my chances. It just changed the things that I could work on. But you adapt and you learn, and I think the kids are right. They've got to do what they think it's right to do now. They will never forgive us if we try to stop them.
I think Rebecca just answered my question, actually. What I was going to say is, having listened to Margot and Gwyn, who talks about what our children are being taught in school, you think, actually, I think the big threat has been that children are sharing this information with each other. They're teaching each other. It's not being taught necessarily in schools. And the criticism of children coming out of school has come from the governments who are wanting the status quo to stay the same. They want to make their big bucks. They're not ready to change on environmental factors yet. So I think there's two photographs that you showed, one of Waterloo Bridge, which was packed solid, and the photograph of the lying down with the police, which had older people. It wasn't lots and lots of young people there enjoying a nice quiet lie down. We have to let these young people lead the way, and we need to follow them, because we've really fucked it up for them.
But we also, solidarity is key. Solidarity and support and resources. Also, all of those things are key. You know, none of this lets anyone off the hook. But we have to recognise that there are times when we who fucked it up, in your terms, and you're absolutely right, now need to be stepping back. Just as with Greenham, we had to argue that we couldn't move forward unless we made Greenham women only. Not because the whole issue had to be women only, but because we had to be able to have a space to develop our different ways of seeing the world, thinking about it, developing non-violent action, making it much more active than traditional versions of it, and and a lot more the web being the symbol of the interconnections of power, power to do, not the power over, that characterized traditional social movements and peace movements, and still often largely do, certainly in the northern and western countries, and I think in quite a lot of the other parts of the world as well.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.